Your brain is actively working against you right now. And it's not because you're stupid. It's because your mind has evolved to take shortcuts. And those shortcuts are precision-engineered traps that keep you stuck in patterns you don't even realize you're following. We're about to walk through 25 psychological laws that explain why people fall into these traps. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. They're operating in your relationships, your career, your finances, and your decisions every single day. Let's start with the most fundamental one. It's called cognitive ease, and it's the reason your brain loves familiar things, even when they're hurting you. Your mind doesn't actually want the truth. It wants efficiency. It wants to conserve energy. So it gravitates toward information that's easy to process, ideas that feel comfortable, and patterns you've already established. This is why people stay in bad jobs for years. This is why you keep scrolling past the same toxic people on social media. This is why you believe things you heard as a child, even when evidence contradicts them. Your brain isn't lazily choosing comfort. It's actively preferring comfort because comfort feels like safety. But here's where it gets darker. Your brain doesn't just prefer what's familiar. It actively resists what challenges it. This is called cognitive dissonance, and it's the reason you'll twist yourself into logical knots to defend beliefs you don't actually think through. Someone shows you evidence that contradicts what you believe, and instead of updating your mind, you find reasons to dismiss them. You question their credibility. You find exceptions to the rule. You attack their character. All of this happens automatically. You're not being stubborn, you're being human. Your identity is wrapped up in your beliefs, and your brain treats threats to your beliefs like threats to your survival. This creates a vicious cycle. The more you defend a belief, the more committed to it you become. The more committed you become, the harder it is to change. And the harder it is to change, the more trapped you feel. Except you don't feel trapped, you feel certain. And that's the trap. Now add a third layer. It's called the sunk cost fallacy. And it's why people stay in relationships that aren't working, why they finish books they hate, why they keep throwing money at failing projects. Your brain doesn't evaluate decisions based on future outcomes. It evaluates them based on what you've already invested. You've spent 5 years with someone. You've already paid for the plane ticket. You've already told people about the project. And because of that investment, your brain tricks you into believing that continuing is the rational choice, even when walking away would be better for you. These 3 laws work together. Cognitive ease makes you prefer the familiar. Cognitive dissonance makes you defend it. And the sunk cost fallacy makes you feel obligated to continue it. And they're just the foundation. The real power of understanding these laws is that they're not character flaws. They're not personal failures. They're design features of a brain that evolved to survive in a world that no longer exists. Your mind was built for a small tribe, scarce resources, and immediate threats. But you're living in a world of infinite information, endless choices, and delayed consequences. That mismatch is what creates the trap. What happens next is you start seeing these patterns everywhere, and that's exactly where we need to go. Because the next set of laws explains why people fall into traps they can actually see coming. The first trap that reveals itself is reciprocity. You do something for someone, and they feel obligated to return the favor. This is hardwired into us. It's so powerful that people will often give back more than they received, just to settle the debt. Salespeople know this. They give you a free sample, a free consultation, a free trial, and suddenly you feel like you owe them something. The trap isn't the initial kindness. The trap is that you can't shake the feeling of obligation even when you know exactly what's happening. Then there's scarcity. When something feels limited, your brain treats it differently. Not because the thing is actually better, but because scarcity triggers fear of missing out. You see a product marked down for 48 hours. You see a job posting that says only 2 spots left. You see an exclusive membership. Your rational mind knows these things are manufactured, but your emotional mind doesn't care. It just knows that if you don't act now, the opportunity disappears, and so you act. The trap works even when you're watching it work. Authority is the next one. We're taught from childhood to trust people in positions of power, doctors, professors, government officials, and that's not entirely wrong. But the trap is that we extend this trust far beyond where it should go. A person in a suit says something with confidence and we believe them. A celebrity endorses a product and we assume they know what they're talking about. We don't question them the way we should because the authority signal overrides our skepticism. The trap is that we've outsourced our thinking to people who may not deserve that power. Social proof comes next. If everyone else is doing something, it must be right. If a product has thousands of 5-star reviews, it must be good. If everyone in your friend group believes something, maybe you should too. The trap is that this mechanism evolved for survival in small groups where everyone actually knew each other. Now it's being exploited at massive scale. Fake reviews, paid influencers, manufactured trends. We're using a Stone Age instinct in a digital age and we're losing commitment and consistency. Once you take a position, once you make a choice, you become psychologically invested in defending it. You bought a product, so you convince yourself it's great. You joined a group, so you adopt their beliefs. You made a public statement, so you stick with it, even when the evidence changes. The trap is that your ego gets involved. Admitting you were wrong feels like admitting you're weak. So you double down instead, you rationalize. You find evidence that supports your original choice and ignore evidence that contradicts it. The trap locks tighter the more you struggle against it. Liking is simple but devastating. We're more easily persuaded by people we like. So marketers make themselves likable. They're attractive, they're funny, they're relatable. They find things in common with you. And suddenly you're more willing to buy from them, believe them, follow them. The trap is that likability has nothing to do with truth. A charismatic liar is still a liar, but your brain doesn't separate the two. It just knows you like them, so their message must be okay. These aren't accidents, these patterns exist because they worked for us once. They kept us alive. But now they're being weaponized. And understanding that they're being weaponized is only half the battle. Because knowing about a trap and avoiding it are two completely different things. That's where the dark laws come in. There are patterns in human psychology that make us vulnerable, and they operate whether we're aware of them or not. The first is what we call the consistency trap. Once you've made a choice, your brain doesn't want to admit it was wrong, so you double down, you defend it, you find reasons to justify it. A person buys into a belief, and then every piece of information gets filtered through that lens. Evidence against it gets dismissed. Evidence for it gets amplified. This isn't stupidity, this is your mind trying to maintain a coherent sense of self. But it's also a trap that gets exploited constantly. Then there's the social proof trap. You look around to see what others are doing, and you assume it must be right. If everyone's buying something, it must be good. If everyone believes something, it must be true. Marketers know this, politicians know this, cults know this. They manufacture the appearance of consensus, and your brain does the rest of the work for you. You feel safer following the crowd. Safer believing what the crowd believes. And that safety feeling? That's the trap closing around you. There's the authority trap. You're wired to defer to people who seem credible or powerful or knowledgeable. A person in a white coat says something, and you believe it more than if your neighbor said the same thing. A celebrity endorses a product, and suddenly it seems trustworthy. We evolved this way because in small groups, respecting authority kept you alive. But now authority is performed. It's manufactured, it's a costume. And your ancient brain can't tell the difference between genuine expertise and someone who just looks the part. The scarcity trap is brutal. When something feels rare or like it's running out, your rational mind shuts down. Your survival instincts take over. Act now or lose it forever. This is why limited time offers work. Why fear-based messaging works. Why people panic buy. Your brain thinks the threat is real because scarcity used to mean actual danger. Food was scarce. Mates were scarce. Territory was scarce. Now it's just a marketing technique. But your nervous system doesn't know that. And then there's the reciprocity trap. Someone does something nice for you, and you feel obligated to return the favor. This is deeply human. It's how cooperation evolved. But it's also exploitable. Give someone a small gift, and they feel indebted. Give them information, flattery, attention, and the same mechanism activates. They want to give something back. They want to say yes to you. Salespeople know this. Con artists know this. They lead with generosity because they know what comes next. These aren't separate traps. They overlap. They reinforce each other. A manipulative system activates your consistency bias, then uses social proof to strengthen it, then brings in an authority figure to legitimize it, then creates scarcity to make you act before you think, then uses reciprocity to make you feel like you chose it yourself. By the time you realize what happened, you're already committed, and your own mind is defending the decision for you. The trap isn't just external. You become part of the mechanism that keeps you trapped. This is why understanding the fourth dark law matters so much. It's called the law of sunk cost, and it's the reason people stay in bad relationships, bad jobs, bad investments for years longer than they should. Here's how it works. You've already invested time, money, or emotional energy into something. Now your brain faces a choice. It can admit that investment was wasted, which feels like failure, or it can throw good money after bad, hoping to eventually break even. Your mind almost always chooses the second option. The trap is that you're not actually making a rational decision about the future. You're making an emotional decision about the past. You're trying to retroactively justify what you've already lost by losing more of it. A person stays in a dead marriage because they've already spent 10 years there. They keep funding a failing business because they've already sunk their savings into it. They finish a terrible movie because they've already watched 40 minutes. The future outcome hasn't changed. The movie is still terrible. The business is still failing. But the past is now pulling them forward like an anchor. What makes this trap so dark is that it's self-reinforcing. The longer you stay, the more you've invested. The more you've invested, the harder it feels to leave. Eventually, the sunk cost becomes so massive that leaving feels impossible. You're not trapped by the situation anymore. You're trapped by the mathematics of your own past decisions. And here's the thing your brain does to keep you locked in. It starts rewriting history. It finds reasons to believe the situation is actually better than it is. It magnifies small improvements and ignores massive red flags. A partner who was neglectful last month suddenly seems caring because they texted you back. A business that lost money last quarter suddenly seems promising because you're trying a new marketing strategy. Your mind is literally distorting reality to justify the sunk cost. This connects directly back to what we covered before. Commitment and consistency demand that you defend your past choices. So even when new information arrives that contradicts those choices, you don't update your beliefs. You defend the old ones instead. The sunk cost law and the commitment trap work together like a 1-2 punch. The reason this matters is that sunk costs are everywhere in modern life. You've paid for the gym membership, so you feel obligated to go even though you hate it. You've started the degree program, so you finish it even though you've realized it's not for you. You've been on 3 dates, so you keep dating someone you're not that into. Your brain is constantly using the past to manipulate your future. The escape route is uncomfortable but simple. You have to consciously separate the past from the future. You have to ask yourself one specific question. If I were making this decision today, from scratch, with no history, would I choose this? Not would I choose it because I've already invested so much. Would I choose it if I were starting over? Most of the time, the honest answer is no. And that answer is the beginning of freedom. Because once you see that you're trapped by your past rather than pulled toward your future, you can actually make a real choice. The sunk cost becomes irrelevant. It's gone. You can't get it back. The only thing you can actually control is what you do next. And that's where the fifth dark law comes in, the law of escalating commitment. It's not enough that you're trapped by the past. Your mind actively works to keep you there by making you invest more and more into a failing path. Here's how it works. You've already spent 5 years in a career you hate. So you spend another year trying to make it work, telling yourself you're close to a breakthrough. Then another. Each year you've invested more time, more credentials, more of your identity into this thing. Quitting now means admitting that all of it was wasted. So instead of leaving, you double down. You take the promotion. You move for the job. You tell yourself that once you reach this next milestone, it'll feel worth it. But it never does. The trap deepens because your brain is trying to protect your ego, not your future. Psychologists call this the commitment and consistency principle. Once you've publicly stated something about yourself, once you've made a choice and defended it to others, your mind works overtime to prove you were right, even when the evidence is screaming that you weren't. This happens in relationships too. You've been with someone for 7 years. There are real problems. But leaving means admitting 7 years were a mistake. So you stay. You have a kid thinking that will fix it. Now you're even more committed. Now the stakes are even higher. The trap has teeth. The dark law is this. The more you've invested in something, the less rational you become about whether you should continue. Your past investment literally blinds you to your present reality. It's not stupidity. It's how your brain is wired. Your mind treats past investment as a reason to continue, when logically it should be completely irrelevant. The only rational thing is this. Forget what you've already spent. Forget the time, the money, the years. Those are gone. They exist only in your memory. What matters is the next decision. Will the next year be better than the last? Will the next 5 years compound into something you actually want? If the answer is no, then every day you stay is a new investment in a failing future. This is why people stay in dead-end jobs for decades. Why they remain in relationships that have become hollow. Why they keep throwing money at bad business ideas. It's not because they're trapped by their past. It's because they're terrified of admitting their past was a mistake. And that fear is so strong that they'll sacrifice their entire future to avoid it. The freedom comes when you can separate who you've been from who you can become. Your past choices don't define your future ones. The sunk cost isn't a reason to continue. It's just a number. And numbers don't have power over you unless you give it to them. But here's where it gets darker. Once you understand sunk cost, you realize most people don't just fall into it by accident. They're pulled in by something deeper. Something that feels almost biological. It's called the mere exposure effect. The more time you spend on something, the more your brain defaults to liking it. Not because it's good, not because it serves you, just because it's familiar. Your brain treats familiarity like safety, and safety feels like truth. So you stay in a job that drains you because you've been there 5 years. You stay in a relationship that's gone cold because you've invested a decade. You keep pursuing a goal that no longer excites you because you've already sacrificed so much for it. The familiarity becomes a cage you mistake for home. The trap tightens when you add identity into the mix. We don't just do things. We become the person who does those things. You're not just someone who stayed in a bad situation. You're a loyal person. You're a committed person. You're someone who doesn't give up. And now changing course doesn't feel like a smart decision. It feels like betraying yourself. This is where the psychological trap becomes almost inescapable. Because leaving means admitting you were wrong. Leaving means accepting that years of effort were misdirected. Leaving means you have to rebuild your identity from scratch. Most people would rather suffer indefinitely than face that. The darkness deepens when you realize this isn't weakness. It's how human psychology actually works. Your brain is wired to find patterns, to create consistency, to defend the choices you've already made. These aren't flaws, they're features. They kept your ancestors alive. But in a world where circumstances change faster than evolution can track, those same features become liabilities. The people who escape this trap aren't smarter or braver. They're just willing to do something most people find unbearable. They're willing to say, I was wrong. I changed my mind. What served me then doesn't serve me now. And that's not a failure. That's growth. But even knowing this, most people still won't do it. Because knowledge isn't the same as acceptance. You can understand sunk cost perfectly and still feel its pull. You can know that familiarity isn't safety and still crave it. You can recognize that identity is fluid and still cling to the person you've been. The real trap isn't the sunk cost itself. It's the gap between what you know and what you're willing to act on. It's the space where understanding goes to die. And that space grows wider the longer you stay. Every day you don't act, your brain finds new reasons to justify staying. New stories about why this time is different, why you should give it one more month, one more year. This is why people don't just fall into these traps. They build them, brick by brick, justification by justification, until the walls are so high they can't even see over them anymore. And once those walls are built, something darker happens. Your brain stops questioning the structure entirely. It becomes invisible. This is the sunk cost fallacy's evil twin. It's not just that you've invested too much to leave. It's that you've invested so much you've actually changed how you think about the situation. The trap rewires your perception of reality itself. You've heard of Stockholm Syndrome, right? Hostages developing feelings for their captors. Most people think it's rare, a psychological oddity. But it's not. It's just the extreme version of something that happens to all of us constantly. When you're trapped somewhere long enough, your mind doesn't rebel. It adapts. It finds reasons to love the cage. Your brain does this because it's trying to protect you from the unbearable cognitive dissonance. The gap between what you believe about yourself and what you're actually tolerating becomes too painful. So instead of leaving, you shrink the gap. You rewrite the story. You tell yourself the cage was always meant to be a home. This is why people stay in bad jobs for decades, why they remain in relationships that hollow them out, why they keep believing in promises that never materialize. The longer you stay, the more your identity becomes fused with staying. Leaving doesn't just mean losing the investment. It means losing the version of yourself you've constructed around it. And here's where it gets really insidious. Your brain starts filtering information to protect the narrative. You notice evidence that supports staying. You rationalize or ignore evidence that contradicts it. A friend points out red flags, and suddenly they're the problem, not the situation. They don't understand, they're being judgmental, they're not seeing the full picture. This is called confirmation bias, and it's weaponized when you're trapped. Your mind becomes a fortress designed to keep you exactly where you are. It's not stupidity, it's survival. Your psyche is literally trying to keep you sane by making the unbearable bearable. The cruelest part is that the longer this goes on, the harder it becomes to trust your own judgment about anything. You've been wrong about this situation for so long that doubt seeps into every decision. If you misjudged this, what else are you wrong about? So you stay even more, because at least here you know the rules, even if the rules are destroying you. And the person in the trap usually can't see any of this happening. They're not aware their perception is being systematically distorted. To them, it feels like they're making rational decisions based on rational thinking, That's what makes these traps so effective. They don't feel like traps from the inside. They feel like home. This is why the next dark law matters so much. Because once you understand how your mind protects itself through distortion, you start to see these mechanisms everywhere. In politics, in cults, in consumer behavior, in how we defend our own bad choices. The trap isn't just psychological, it's neurological. It's baked into how your brain is designed to survive. Your brain doesn't care about truth. It cares about coherence. It cares about survival. And when those two things conflict, survival wins every single time. This is why cognitive dissonance is so painful. When you hold two contradictory beliefs simultaneously, your nervous system treats it like a threat. Your body floods with stress chemicals. Your amygdala lights up, so you don't sit with the contradiction. You don't examine it. You eliminate it. You distort one belief to match the other. You rewrite the story. You forget the parts that don't fit. Think about a smoker who knows cigarettes cause cancer. The contradiction is unbearable, so they don't quit. Instead, they rationalize. Their grandfather smoked and lived to 90. Their friend's cousin quit and got lung cancer anyway. They downplay the risk. They emphasize their own special circumstances. They've now solved the dissonance without changing their behavior. The trap is complete. This mechanism scales up to everything. A parent who yells at their kids knows yelling damages children. But stopping requires admitting they've already caused harm. That's intolerable. So instead they reframe. They were yelled at and they turned out fine. Kids need discipline. Everyone yells sometimes. The dissonance dissolves. The harm continues. A company knowingly sells a product that harms users. The executives involved aren't cartoon villains sitting around plotting evil. They're experiencing dissonance. So they compartmentalize. They focus on the jobs the company creates. They emphasize the product's benefits. They question the research. They hire consultants who tell them what they want to hear. The cognitive distortion protects them from the weight of what they're actually doing. Here's what makes this trap so dark. The mechanism that protects you also blinds you. The same mental flexibility that lets you survive trauma also lets you justify cruelty. The same ability to reframe that keeps you functional also keeps you delusional. Your brain's greatest survival tool is also its greatest capacity for self-deception. And you can't think your way out of it. Presenting contradictory information to someone in cognitive dissonance doesn't resolve the dissonance. It intensifies it. So they dig deeper into the rationalization. They become more committed to the distorted belief, not less. This is called the backfire effect. The more evidence you show someone that contradicts their worldview, the more they defend it. You see this everywhere in modern discourse. Show someone data that challenges their political beliefs, and they don't update. They attack the source. They find alternative data. They question the methodology. They've now increased their commitment to the original belief. The trap has strengthened. The only way out requires something that feels almost impossible. You have to sit with the discomfort. You have to hold the contradiction without resolving it. You have to tolerate the cognitive and emotional pain long enough for your brain to reorganize around a new understanding. This takes time. It takes safety. It takes willingness to be wrong. Most people never do this. It's too uncomfortable. The distortions feel true because they've been reinforced 1,000 times. The rationalizations feel rational because your brain is exceptionally good at making them sound logical. You're not lying to yourself. You're protecting yourself. And that protection is so seamless you can't see it. This is why people stay in bad relationships, bad jobs, bad belief systems. This is why abusers convince themselves they're not abusing. This is why we all carry contradictions we've stopped noticing. The trap isn't that you're stupid or weak. The trap is that your own mind is designed to keep you trapped inside it. Your brain doesn't just rationalize bad situations. It actively rewrites your history to justify them. This is called confabulation. And it's not a bug in your thinking, it's a feature. Here's how it works. You make a choice. Any choice. Your brain then searches backward through your memories and forward through your predictions to build a narrative where that choice makes perfect sense. Not because it does, but because your mind needs internal consistency more than it needs truth. A person stays in a toxic relationship for 5 years. When they finally leave, they don't remember it as 5 years of being mistreated. They remember the 3 good weekends. They remember the promises that were made. They remember the times they thought about leaving, but decided to give it one more chance. Their brain has already rewritten the story, so that staying was the reasonable thing to do. This is why confronting someone with evidence of their own behavior often backfires. You show them a video of themselves being cruel. You show them screenshots of their own words, and instead of accepting it, their mind gets to work. It finds reasons why the video was taken out of context. It explains why those words meant something different than what they appear to mean. It generates a version of events where they were actually the reasonable one all along. The darker truth is that this mechanism works on everyone. You're not immune to it. Right now, you're probably doing it about something. We all are. You've made decisions you're not entirely proud of, and your brain has already built the justification structure. You might not even be aware it's there, because the work happened below the surface. This is the 9th dark law. Your mind will always choose internal consistency over external truth. Given a conflict between what you believe about yourself and what the world is telling you, your brain will almost always adjust your perception of the world. The person who yells at their kids tells themselves they're being firm. The person who betrays a friend tells themselves it was necessary. The person who ignores clear warning signs tells themselves they're being optimistic. The person who stays silent when they should speak tells themselves it's not their place. And here's what makes this trap so effective. The narrative your brain builds feels true from the inside. It doesn't feel like you're lying to yourself. It feels like you're seeing things clearly. Everyone else might be confused, but you understand what's really going on. This is why people can be simultaneously intelligent and completely deluded about their own behavior. A brilliant surgeon can be abusive at home and genuinely believe he's a good man. A successful businesswoman can exploit her employees and see herself as generous. A parent can damage their child and experience themselves as loving. The trap deepens because once you've committed to a narrative, your brain starts filtering information to protect it. You unconsciously avoid evidence that contradicts your story. You seek out people who confirm it. You interpret ambiguous situations as supporting it. You remember the moments that fit and forget the ones that don't. This is why the people who need to change the most are often the most resistant to it. They've already built the perfect justification structure. They've already explained away the contradictions. Their mind has already made peace with the dissonance. From the inside, everything makes sense. The way out starts with understanding this mechanism. Not judging yourself for having it, not pretending you're above it, but recognizing that your brain is actively working right now to keep you trapped in your own narratives. The question isn't whether you're doing this. The question is what story you're currently telling yourself that might not be true. Most of us tell ourselves the same story over and over, and the scary part is we don't even realize we're doing it. You wake up and something minor goes wrong. Your coffee spills. Someone doesn't text back. You make a small mistake at work, and instantly your brain reaches for the narrative it knows best. Maybe it's I'm incompetent. Maybe it's nobody actually likes me. Maybe it's I always mess things up. The specific words don't matter. What matters is that you've told this story so many times that it feels like fact. This is what psychologists call the narrative trap. Your brain isn't trying to hurt you. It's trying to make sense of the world by creating patterns. But once a pattern solidifies, it becomes a filter. You start seeing evidence that confirms the story while filtering out everything that contradicts it. Someone gives you a compliment and you dismiss it. They're just being nice. Someone criticizes you and it confirms everything. See, I knew it. Your brain is literally curating your reality to match the story you've been telling yourself. Here's where it gets darker. The more you tell the story, the more your behavior changes to match it. If your story is, "I'm not a creative person," you stop trying creative things. You avoid situations where creativity might be required. Years pass and you have zero creative output. And now the story feels ironclad. You have evidence. You have a decade of inaction to point to. But that wasn't destiny. That was a choice your brain made to stay consistent with a narrative. The trap deepens because other people start to believe your story too. If you keep telling people you're anxious, they start treating you like an anxious person. They accommodate you. They don't invite you to things. They talk about you in certain ways. And suddenly the world is organized around your narrative. It becomes self-fulfilling. What's insidious is that your brain actually prefers this. Certainty feels safer than possibility. Even if the certainty is that you're broken or limited or unlovable, at least you know what to expect. At least you're not vulnerable to hope. Hope means you could fail. Hope means you could be disappointed. So your brain keeps you locked in the story because the story is predictable. And here's the part that most people miss. Your brain doesn't distinguish between a story that happened to you and a story you're actively creating right now. If you tell yourself, "I'm the kind of person who always fails," your brain treats that as a threat. It goes into protection mode. It makes you more anxious, more defensive, more likely to actually fail. Because failure is the expected outcome. Failure is safe. Failure matches the story. Breaking out of this requires something most people aren't willing to do. It requires admitting that the story you've been telling might not be true. Not that it's completely false. Not that your past didn't happen. But that the interpretation you've built around it might be flexible. The narrative trap doesn't care how smart you are or how self-aware you think you are. It catches everyone. The only difference between people who escape it and people who stay trapped is whether they're willing to question the story. Not once. Over and over. Every single time the story tries to run. And that's where the 11th dark law emerges, the law of narrative persistence. Once a story about yourself takes root, it doesn't just sit there quietly. It actively rewrites your memory. It reinterprets your choices. It reaches backward and forward through time, making everything fit. You made a mistake at work, a small one. But if your narrative is that you're incompetent, suddenly that mistake becomes evidence, proof. It joins a collection in your mind of all the other times you failed, even if those times didn't happen the way you remember them. Your brain isn't lying to you on purpose. It's just filtering reality through the story you've already accepted. This is why people stay trapped in narratives they consciously reject. You might know intellectually that you're capable, but the narrative whispers constantly. It whispers when you're tired. It whispers when something reminds you of a past failure. It whispers when someone criticizes you, even gently. And each whisper feels like a memory, like evidence, like truth. The trap deepens because the narrative also controls what you notice. If you believe you're socially awkward, you'll notice every pause in conversation, every glance away, every moment someone seems uncomfortable. You won't notice the times people lean in, the times they laugh, the times they ask to see you again. Your attention is trained by the story. It's looking for confirmation, and confirmation is everywhere if you know where to look. This is called confirmation bias, but that's just the clinical name. The lived experience is much darker. It's the feeling that the world is conspiring to prove you right about yourself. It's the exhausting certainty that you already know how this will end. But here's what most people miss. The narrative only has power because you keep feeding it. not through grand decisions, through tiny ones, through the small choice to interpret ambiguity as rejection, to read silence as judgment, to assume the worst about someone's intentions because it fits the story. The person who escapes doesn't do it through positive thinking. That's another trap, just replacing one narrative with another. They escape by becoming radically honest about the gap between what they believe about themselves and what they actually do, between the story and the behavior. Because here's the thing, behavior doesn't lie. Your actions reveal what you actually believe, not what you think you believe. If you're afraid of rejection, you'll avoid situations where rejection is possible. If you believe you're not creative, you won't try. If you believe you're unlovable, you'll sabotage relationships before they get close enough to hurt you. The narrative persists because it's self-fulfilling. It creates the exact conditions that seem to confirm it. And the longer it runs, the more evidence it accumulates, the more real it feels. The only way out is to interrupt it, not by arguing with it. Arguing with a narrative just makes it stronger. You interrupt it by doing the thing it says you can't do. Not once, not when you feel ready. When you're terrified, when every cell in your body is screaming that this confirms the story. That's when you do it anyway. Small, unglamorous, barely noticeable to anyone else. But you do it because the narrative only survives if you keep agreeing with it. The moment you stop, even once, even in some small way, you've created a crack. And cracks in old stories are where new ones begin to grow. This is where the psychological trap becomes a prison you've built yourself. Because here's the dark law nobody wants to admit. Once you've invested this much in a narrative, your brain doesn't want you to escape it. It actively fights against it. There's a concept called cognitive dissonance. It's the discomfort you feel when reality contradicts the story you've been telling yourself. And your mind will do almost anything to eliminate that discomfort. Not by changing the story, by changing how you see reality. You start filtering information. A compliment that contradicts your narrative gets dismissed as flattery or pity. Evidence that you're capable gets reinterpreted as luck or timing. Success becomes an accident. Failure becomes proof of your original story. Your brain becomes a machine designed to protect the narrative, not to serve you. This is why people stay in situations that destroy them. Why they stay in jobs that hollow them out, relationships that diminish them. Because admitting the narrative was wrong means admitting something even worse, that they chose it, that they built it, that they've spent months or years or decades agreeing with a lie about themselves. The investment trap works both ways. The more you've sacrificed for the story, the more real it feels. A person who spent 10 years proving they're not good enough has 10 years of evidence, 10 years of small choices, 10 years of moments where they did the thing that confirmed the narrative. That's not just a story anymore, that feels like identity, that feels like truth. And here's what makes it truly dark. The narrative protects itself by making you the architect of your own evidence. You're not a passive victim of your own story. You're an active participant. Every time you make a choice that confirms it, you're voting for it. Every time you don't try, you're building the case. Every time you assume failure before you've even started, you're constructing the proof. Your brain offers you a deal. It says, stop fighting the narrative, and I'll stop creating the discomfort. Accept the story and the cognitive dissonance goes away. You'll feel coherent again, whole. Even if that wholeness is built on a foundation of lies. This is why people with low self-worth often sabotage their own success. It's not weakness. It's actually a kind of twisted strength. Their brain is working perfectly. It's protecting the narrative. Because a success that contradicts the story creates more dissonance than a failure that confirms it. The crack you create when you stop agreeing with the narrative, even once, even in some small way, that crack is terrifying, because it means the narrative is fragile. It means it was always fragile. It means you could have stepped out of it at any point. And that realization, that you had a choice and you didn't take it, that's a weight most people aren't ready to carry. So they don't create the crack. They keep doing the small, unglamorous thing. They keep agreeing. They keep voting for the narrative with their choices. And the story gets stronger. The evidence piles up. And the prison becomes invisible because you've decorated it so thoroughly that it starts to feel like home. This is where the trap becomes airtight. Because once you've decorated your prison, you develop what psychologists call cognitive dissonance reduction. Your brain can't handle the contradiction between who you think you are and what you're actually doing, so it rewrites the story. It makes the bars invisible by telling you they were never there. You start seeking out information that confirms your choices. You avoid people who question your narrative. You interpret ambiguous evidence as support for what you already believe. This is called confirmation bias, and it's not a bug in human thinking. It's a feature. It keeps us sane when we're trapped in our own decisions. The dark law here is that the more you've invested in a belief, the harder you'll fight to defend it. A person who's spent 10 years building a life around a particular identity will defend that identity with almost religious fervor. They'll rationalize contradictions. They'll dismiss critics as jealous or uninformed. They'll find meaning in the sacrifice itself. Watch how this plays out in real time. Someone commits to a career path that makes them miserable. Instead of reconsidering, they tell themselves that suffering is noble, that struggle builds character, that their pain proves they're serious. The discomfort becomes evidence of virtue rather than a warning signal. The trap reinforces itself through moral reframing. The same mechanism works for relationships. You stay with someone unsuitable because leaving would mean admitting you made a mistake. So you rewrite the history. You remember the good moments more vividly. You minimize the bad ones. You tell yourself that real love means staying even when it hurts. The relationship becomes a test of your commitment, rather than a choice you can reverse. This is why people cling to failing projects, dead-end jobs, toxic friendships, and false beliefs. Admitting the trap exists means admitting you built it. It means accepting that your choices were wrong. And for most people, that's psychologically unbearable. It's easier to keep decorating the prison. The cruelest part is that the longer you stay, the more evidence accumulates that you should have left. The sunk costs grow. The alternative futures you didn't choose become increasingly distant and abstract. The prison becomes not just decorated but fortified. You've built a whole identity around being the person who stays, who perseveres, who doesn't quit. And here's what makes this a dark law, rather than just a psychological quirk. Institutions and other people know this about you. They know that once you've invested enough, you'll rationalize almost anything to avoid admitting the investment was wasted. So they get you to invest early and often. They get you to make public commitments. They get you to tell other people about your choices. Because now you're not just defending a decision to yourself. You're defending it to your entire social circle. Every time you tell someone else about your commitment, you reinforce it. You make it harder to change. You create social pressure to stay consistent. The prison has guards now, and those guards are your own need to appear coherent and trustworthy to the people around you. This is why cults work, why bad marriages persist, why people stay in careers that destroy them, why false beliefs become unshakable. The trap isn't just psychological, it's social, it's structural, and once you've decorated it thoroughly enough, escape requires not just changing your mind but rebuilding your entire sense of self. That's where the 14th law emerges, the law of identity entanglement. Your beliefs don't exist in isolation. They're woven into how you introduce yourself, how your friends know you, how your family understands their place relative to you. You're not just a person who believes something. You become that belief in the eyes of everyone around you. Change it and you're not updating an idea. You're betraying an identity that others have come to depend on. Your mother knows you as the practical one, the skeptical one, the ambitious one. Your partner chose you partly because of who they thought you were. Your colleagues have organized their own behavior around your predictable patterns. When you threaten to change, you're threatening the stability of their entire social world. So they push back, not maliciously, protectively. They make jokes about your new direction. They remind you of past failures. They subtly withdraw approval. And you feel it immediately. Because you're not just fighting your own psychology anymore. You're fighting everyone else's investment in keeping you exactly as you've always been. This is why people stay trapped longer than the raw evidence would ever suggest they should. A woman knows her marriage is loveless, but stays because her entire identity is wrapped up in being a devoted wife. A man knows his job is killing him, but remains because he's spent 20 years becoming the guy who does that job, and everyone around him has organized their lives accordingly. A person clings to a political belief not because the evidence supports it anymore, but because rejecting it would mean admitting they've been wrong, in front of everyone who's watched them defend it. The trap deepens because escape now requires social courage, not just intellectual honesty. You have to be willing to disappoint people, to confuse them, to make them uncomfortable, to become a stranger to people who thought they knew you completely. And that's genuinely hard in a way that pure logic can't resolve. The 15th law follows directly, the law of sunk identity. The longer you've been something, the more of your life's narrative depends on it remaining true. If you've spent a decade as the person in your friend group who doesn't drink, changing that requires rewriting not just your future but your past. Were all those moments of proud abstinence actually moments of self-deception? If you've spent years as the person who doesn't believe in therapy, seeking help now means admitting all those conversations where you dismissed it were wrong. People would rather live in a false identity than face the vertigo of reconstructing one. Because identity isn't just psychology. It's the story you tell about yourself. It's the narrative thread that makes your life coherent. Pull on it and everything unravels. Not just your beliefs, your memory, your sense of who you are and why you've made the choices you've made. This is the deepest trap of all, not the ones you can't see, the ones you can't afford to see, because seeing them would cost you everything you've built yourself into being. The trap becomes self-sustaining, not because the evidence is hidden, but because the price of acknowledging it is too high. You're not just defending a belief anymore. You're defending the person you've convinced yourself you have to be. That's the final law. And it might be the most dangerous one, because it doesn't require manipulation from outside. You do it to yourself. So what do we do with all of this? You've now seen 15 psychological traps that shape how we think, how we decide, and how we justify ourselves when we're wrong. They're not bugs in the human mind. They're features. They evolved because they solved real problems in small tribes where reputation was everything and resources were scarce. But we're not living in small tribes anymore. We're living in a world where these same mechanisms can trap us in loops that destroy our relationships, our careers, our health, and our sense of reality. The first thing to understand is that knowing about these traps doesn't immunize you from them. In fact, sometimes it makes it worse. You become the person who thinks you're too smart to fall for cognitive biases, which is itself a bias. You become the person who recognizes confirmation bias in others but not in yourself. Self-awareness without humility is just another trap with a different name. So the actual antidote isn't knowledge, it's friction. It's building systems and relationships that force you to slow down before you commit to a belief or a decision. It's asking someone you trust to challenge you. It's writing down your prediction before you see the outcome, so you can't retroactively convince yourself you knew it all along. It's actively seeking out information that contradicts what you want to believe. Not to change your mind necessarily, but to make sure you're not just listening to an echo of yourself. It's also about recognizing the cost. Every time you feel defensive about a belief, every time you find yourself working overtime to explain away evidence, every time you realize you're protecting an idea instead of pursuing the truth, that's a signal. That's the moment to pause and ask yourself what you're actually protecting and what it's costing you. The people who navigate these traps most effectively aren't the ones with the highest IQ. They're the ones who've learned to be genuinely uncomfortable with certainty. They hold their beliefs lightly. They change their minds publicly when they're wrong, because they understand that the short-term embarrassment is infinitely cheaper than the long-term cost of being right about the wrong thing. You can't eliminate these traps. They're wired into how you process information. But you can build awareness. You can create distance between the impulse and the action. You can choose to be wrong now instead of doubling down on being wrong later. The darkest thing about these laws isn't that they control you. It's that once you see them, you can't unsee them. You'll start noticing them everywhere. In the news, in your relationships, in yourself. And that discomfort is actually the point. That discomfort is where growth happens. So the real takeaway isn't that you're trapped. It's that you have a choice. Every single day, you can choose to defend what you believe or to defend the truth. Those aren't always the same thing. And the moment you understand that difference, you're already halfway out of the trap.